Welcome to another episode of Close Mode. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I'm super lucky to be here with Elisabeth Marino, who's the current president of the Revenue Enablement Society. And I have some questions for you about that. Held enablement positions with SEMrush and LiveRamp, if I remember correctly. But I also love the work you do with Journey's End Refugee Services and a Girl Scout troop lead. And I just found out your daughter's in the armed services, which is even cooler. So like mama, like daughter, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So you and I were having a chat about a week ago, and we were talking about reps struggling with customers diagnose their own problems, usually poorly, prescribe their own solution, usually poorly. And you and I morphed into this dialogue about internal customers tend to do that to sales enablement professionals, that internal customers diagnose their own problem, come to us and say, here's the solution, and then we execute it. And so we're going to talk about how to fix that. But just prior to that, I'd love to hear in this reasonably new role about Revenue Enablement Society. What are your goals for the year? What's happening there?
So the Revenue Enablement Society is taking very seriously the rapid change in the sales market and the procurement market as things are becoming AI boosted or AI entirely. So procurement is being done through EMS systems and other systems where AI is taking your buying criteria, such as you have established it, and applying it to what it finds on the internet and serving you back however many options you've asked for, 3, 4, 5,
Yep.
for you to take a deeper dive. And what happens is that because of this, buyers are entering the sales cycle even later than they did before. So during COVID, when everybody went remote, we saw people entering the sales cycle instead of at the early introduction process, they started entering the sales cycle mid-discovery. And now with folks that are receiving inbound leads from these AI boosted procurement or AI completely independent procurement, the buyer comes in thinking they're already at the negotiation stage.
Yeah.
And what that does is it really changes the way that sellers have to sell, because they still need to do that discovery. They still need to touch on latent pains. They still need to create the life cycle of the use of the project, right? Whatever the product is or whatever the service is, they need to understand, do you have the precursor that you need? And do you understand the dependencies downline? They have to do all of that work, but the buyer doesn't think so.
Yeah.
The buyer thinks, hey, I'm ready to pay my money. I'd like to pay 20% than you're asking, and let's get on with it.
Right.
So this is a really big shift, maybe the biggest shift we've seen in sales in more than a decade. The COVID shift was big. This is bigger.
Yeah.
So there are, particularly at the enterprise level, there are companies that are being completely boxed out because their web presence is not AI enabled or optimized. Remember, SEO was the biggest thing for a while, and then your site needed to be voice optimized because people were talking to their computers or their Alexa. Well, now you need to be AI optimized. Or when your AI procurement bot goes searching the internet, you may not be one of those 3 to 5 options that get served up to senior leadership. So we're all in on AI, all of that to say, we're all in on AI, and we're all in on helping our membership understand what to do about it, how to have the conversation with your sellers, how this can actually seriously increase your closing ratio if you approach it right.
Yeah.
And how completely out of a job you're going to be if you do not know how to assist AI boosted products.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have an investor who's CSO of a huge consumer products company, and he's seeing this, right? He's selling to a lot of retail organizations, and they're seeing some of this. Yeah, and we're going to jump into our second topic here in a second, but you just bring up such a really interesting point that I see that the role of a seller now, given where the buyer has gone based on what you just said, is we've always reacted to their decision process. What is your decision process? And I feel like something just clicked in my mind that with the buyers that far ahead, I've been arguing this on this show and just in regular business conversations that we need to now know better than the buyer how they should be buying, who should be involved, what are the criteria, because and you just linked it up for me that they're kind of at that stage, and so if we're going to meet them there, we can't be asking, we need to lead them. So thank you. That
So that's a perfect analogy to something that just happened to one of my friend's daughters. She bought a new house, brand spanking new. No one ever did anything there. And she bought a washer and a dryer. And the dryer was delivered, as was the washer. None of those hoses that connect the washer to the water, none of those tubes that connect the dryer to the outside came with her appliances. And those are the kinds of things, the kinds of mistakes that we don't want our customers to make, right?
yeah.
These are very small dependencies. You can call the appliance store, they'll have them ready when you get there. But these are real dependencies. And no one taught my friend's daughter how to buy appliances, right? And that you need this extra stuff. And we need to do that for our buyers who may also not understand both the preparation and the downline dependencies.
They do not, and we're cheating into our other topic, but I'm fine with it because I think you and I both agree that like that this is a really important thing. And one of it's funny. I wish I would have said this, but I got this from one of my clients who said, buyers are sort of like veterinarians, right? You get a snake, a mouse, a monkey walking in all day long, and you have to
Right.
treat these different animals where we're sort of like surgeons. We're not only surgeons, we're neurosurgeons and we're spinal specialists. We have watched people buy our stuff over and over and over again, where that buyer might be buying this thing once every year or 2 years, and they're not that good at it, which is kind of the point I just heard you making, which is why it lands
Mhm.
back to saying we do have these best practices internally. We've watched people suboptimally buy, optimally buy, and we can share those. So this is a huge opportunity. Yeah, it's so cool to hear that Revenue Enablement Society is leaning into this because you're right. It is a massive shift. So let's talk a little bit about. I love this idea of those who are leading revenue enablement groups not simply being order takers, which is what we've asked for our reps. Just do not be fulfillment. And that's what you made me think of when we talked about this last time. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that. What's the problem with internal customers of revenue enablement diagnosing their own problem, prescribing their own solution, and we simply react to it and fill that order?
So when a stakeholder comes to enablement, inevitably they have a pain point that is affecting one of the OKRs that they get measured on for the year. And what most folks think of enablement as is the folks who train and create on the job behavior change. And yet, the way we think of ourselves is we optimize processes. So we remove friction points. Is the friction point the product? Are we literally selling the wrong thing to the wrong people? Is the friction point that we're now using a tool that's outdated or not functioning properly? Is the friction point communication between two departments? Maybe legal's taking way too long, right, to validate a deal, and time kills all deals, as we know.
Yeah.
So our job is to be a detective, to go into the end result that they're looking for and move backwards through the process until we find the friction point that affects that outcome. So when we're asked to train something, unless you can tell me that it's not a communication problem or a tool problem or a process problem or a market fit problem, right? Then I have a lot of
Yeah.
homework to do. And my goal is to solve your problem. It is not to give you what you asked for.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it's even Elizabeth. I feel like it's even help you diagnose your problem, right? Maybe even a level
correct.
up from that. And so I wonder, like, what's the process? Like, if you're going to interrupt their process, I feel like we as enablement professionals have got to bring back, say, okay, maybe that just like we would with a customer. Okay, maybe that's one option, but that means we need to have kind of a diagnostic process in place, right?
Absolutely. And I am a big fan of having an enablement intake form. And whether this is something that you do async or sync, you do need to ask the questions. First of all, who's your executive sponsor? who's going to help you get your point heard by the right people and get your wisdom followed. Somebody made this ask, maybe they don't have the power, right? So you need to go up the chain. So who's the executive sponsor? One, what's the outcome that we're looking for? Two, and what's the outcome we have now? Three, all of those things are table stakes. And then I like to leave the process of how we're going to get there out. I don't want someone to say, I need a training or I need a this or I need a that. I prefer, why do you think this is happening? And ask them to diagnose what they think is happening. But it's still my job to take a 360 view and just walk my way back through the process. After that, we need a timeline. When do you need this solved by? And we also need to have some options as to who can we involve. Can we just involve frontline sellers? Are we also involving CSMs? Are we involving frontline managers, right? Like, how far up the food chain are you comfortable with me going without coming back to you and talking about it again? And once we have that information, then we know what we can go and diagnose. So that's where I like to start. And then once I have a look at those things, I'm going to look at related leading and lagging indicators. I'm going to go to RevOps or Sales Ops and get as many numbers as I can to see if there's a crack in the foundation ahead of the problem you noticed. Maybe it's bigger than you thought, or maybe it happens earlier than you thought. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, the thing that keeps coming to mind is like there's all these levers we can pull, right? There's a problem, and which lever, which dial do we turn? And the dial that's turned to a lot, which I think is just based on legacy practices, is well, our salespeople need to be trained. So let's just here's the business problem, and let's just go train them, and that's what keeps coming to mind. And that might be the right thing in some instances, but I feel like that lever's pulled a lot. Or let's just add another tool.
Yep. And you know what? I'm fine if the answer is training. I don't mean to be down on training.
Yeah.
I love training, but training is one leg of a three-legged stool.
Yeah.
If you're going to train something, you cannot do one and done, because study after study after study after study shows it doesn't work. You need to train, and you need to have a reinforcement plan, and you need to have an accountability plan. And that's one of the reasons that we get that executive sponsor. When we work out what the result is and it's a training plan, I'm going to serve the training plan and the reinforcement plan and the accountability plan back to the executive sponsor so that they understand that I'm not staffed for this. I'm not staffed for all of the reinforcement and accountability that's involved in this level of behavior change. So we need to build it into frontline manager experiences and senior leadership experiences. I'm a big fan of what I refer to as the 5-minute accountability and reinforcement plan. Most things that we ask our sellers to change can, in fact, be holding them accountable and reinforced within 5 minutes. And that can be added to any one-on-one. Once we ask for more than 5 minutes of a frontline manager's time in their one-on-one, we lose.
Yep.
They don't have it.
You and I were well, we're just looking at some data, right, from the research we did, and very quickly, like we're looking at high performing teams and low performing teams and what kind of investments they made and are planning on making this year. And it was fascinating. If you recall the data we went through, the high performing teams had much higher win rates. They were meeting their overall goals at a higher rate. And one of the simple punches that came out of this, it wasn't, I was looking at what are they investing in? But what we learned from that research, it's the high and low performers were both investing in similar stuff. The difference was how they approached it. And you just hit that. Like people who are doing training or people who are buying tools. There was a pull through plan. And I feel like that's such a legacy practice in our space of check the thing off, roll it out. And it was crystal clear, like 3 to 5x the high performers were achieving better results, and they were putting at least as much emphasis on pull through as they were on acquisition of whatever it was they were bringing in. So I do go ahead.
We do our frontline managers a disservice by not teaching them how to manage reinforcement and how to manage accountability. But these 5-minute accountability plans that I talk about a lot actually are as simple as, okay, team, this week I want you to try the new skill and I want you to send me 3 snippets of a call that you think you did it well, 3 snippets of a call that you think it went sideways,
Hmm.
right? No one knows whether the manager ever listens to those,
Yeah.
but every manager has time to receive an email. And then you have the opportunity when they come in for their one-on-one to say, now describe the skill to me again. That's reinforcement. You can correct them if they describe it poorly. That's reinforcement. And then you ask them about the call that went well. Why do you think it went well? Again, you don't have to have listened to the call. And then you ask them about the call that they think went poorly. Why do you think it went poorly? All of this is reinforcement. All
Yeah.
of this holds the rep accountable. And most managers, in my experience, can do it in 3 minutes, not even 5. This is not rocket science, but we
Yeah.
don't teach our frontline managers how to do it. We want them to be responsible for it, but I think we expect them to psychically know
Yeah.
how it
Well,
works.
but you also get after the issue that I've heard for the last year and a half. Or managers just do not have time to coach, whether it's skill coaching or deal coaching, which we're learning are two radically different things. Let's focus on the individual skills versus let's get this deal closed.
Yep.
And we could have a whole other episode on that one, but managers don't have time. So you've put it in the perspective of, hey, do it in 3 to 5 minutes. It's interesting because I was interviewing a CRO on this podcast, and his response was make time, which really no, but I loved his notion because it's like, what are you doing that's more important than pulling through? And but that's also an easier said than done thing. Every frontline leader I know is slammed, absolutely slammed. But I did, again, it's a tough statement. Make time, you got to do it. But so I wonder. Let's go back to the diagnosis and prescription to your internal customers. And this struck me
Yeah.
after our last conversation. So for folks that are sitting in as a revenue enablement lead, this requires you to push back on people a level or 2 levels, maybe 3 levels above you. And it occurred to me when you and I were talking, like that's kind of a diplomacy skill, right? What guidance would you have for people? How do you challenge someone and say, and in essence, you're not going to say, you don't have the problem right, you don't have the solution right. What's a diplomatic way to change that conversation with those internal executives?
I would suggest a couple of things. First off, think of yourself as anything but sales enablement. Think of yourself as a mechanic or a plumber or a doctor. If somebody comes in and says, my stomach's very upset, give me some aspirin, right? You would readily say it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Or if somebody hires a plumber to fix their toilet and they say, I don't want it to cost more than $25, the plumber would say it doesn't work that way, right? So have some comfort and some respect for the fact that you are an expert and you do know that some things don't work that way. And ultimately, every time that you give a bad answer to senior leadership, they lose more faith in
Yes.
enablement. If you want enablement to be respected, if you want enablement to have all of that trust from senior leadership, you got to tell them the truth and you got to tell them what works. So let's just make that table stakes, right? Let's just pretend we're not going to tell them what they want to hear
Yeah.
anymore because we want to be respected and we want to be trusted. And then you explain, I appreciate your input and I'll look into that. But I'm also going to look into XYZ because I've found that sometimes that's cheaper and more effective. These are 2 words that our senior leadership love: cheaper and effective, right?
Yeah.
And then they're very open to you having a different idea if it's going to save them money and if it's going to save them time, right? Another thing that I'm very fond of saying is I want to make sure we only solve this problem once and that it doesn't come up again. So give me some time to validate your concern. Validate,
I
another
love
word they
that.
love, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you gotta speak their language to some extent, but you also have to start with the respect for yourself and your expertise that says the first answer is often not the right answer. Senior leadership could be 100% right, but if you don't validate that, you're never going to know, are you?
Yeah.
right?
Well, and it
So,
it 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 sure elevates the role. And strangely enough, what comes to mind is I've done some work in procurement organizations, and there's this thing in procurement you're probably familiar with: share of spend. How much of the company's spend goes through procurement? And I remember talking to the CPO at American Airlines. How do you increase share of spend? And it's by being a more strategic resources to the people who are buying stuff. And that's what just came to mind. It's the same kind of shared service that procurement might be, and we want to increase. Maybe it's not share of spend. We'll have to figure out what it is, but yeah, it's you become a more strategic resource to those folks. They come to you earlier in the process, which is
yep,
also a procurement frustration. They come to me at the end and go, put this deal together with this supplier, and it's the same thing. It's building credibility of the function to say, I need you involved earlier because I'm going to have a better solution. And yeah, you also made me think of that old notion of measure twice, cut once. That's
absolutely.
yeah.
And why are we building these great resumes? Why are we learning 5 different sales methodologies and getting all these certifications if we're just going to pretend we don't know any of that and nod and smile when somebody asks us for the wrong thing?
Yeah.
Let's stop that.
Yeah.
Let's do the job they're paying us for. They don't always want us to do it. They want the answer that they think is going to do it. But what they want more is they want the right answer.
Yeah. This is a really good and powerful message. I mean that as sincerely as I can say, and I think that's a great note to end on. It's give us that confidence to do that. You've been super gracious with your time and your ideas, getting ready for this and executing today, and I really appreciate it. And I think we need to follow up and talk about this AI shift. You're onto something there, and I'd love to hear. Obviously, you're thinking about it at the Revenue Enablement Society level, and I think we should talk about that more because I agree it's a great shift. But again, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.